Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American Republic?
Hello everybody. The English sisters, the Mitfords, are having a moment. They have their own show, the supposed outrageous Mitford sisters, communists and fascists, remarkable family. And perhaps the most remarkable sister was Jessica Mitford, who lived in California and was the author of a wonderful book called The American Way of Death. We're not talking about the American Way of Death today, and we're not talking to Jessica Mitford. She's not around. So we found the best thing we have, which is my old friend Julia Hobsbawn, the remarkable British writer, organizer, maven on everything, particularly on work. Julia has some very interesting ideas, not on the American way of death, but on the American way of work, which she suggests might actually be in crisis. Julia is joining us by audio. We don't have her video, so I'm putting her charming face up. Julia, are you there?
I am. Hello. I mean, what high praise to be.
Yeah, I mean, who compares you? You owe me comparing you to Jessica Mitford. And we can replicate the famous interview of Christopher Hitchens and Jessica Mitford from 1988. So if we do a good job, maybe we'll get 100,000 viewers for this too.
That would be very good. Well, I can actually one-up you because I knew her as Decca and I used to hang out with her in my 20s. Because she was the best friend of Maya Angelou, I was Maya Angelou's publicist for a while. And I have often thought that my next book should be The American Way of Work, partly modeled on Jessica Mitford's book, The American Way of Work.
So you owe me.
I do owe you. Yeah.
Well, no, if you already thought about it, I owe you. So let's get to it, Julia. You've been giving a great deal of thought to the future of work. You've written best-selling books about it. You've been on the show lots of times. I know you are the CEO and founder of something called Workathon, World Work Organization. So what exactly is the American way of work, and why is it under threat, under assault?
So, I mean, I have become very, very interested in the story of work, as you know, Andrew, because you had me on. I wrote a book called The Nowhere Office at the end of the pandemic, which took a bit of a punt and correctly, as it happened, predicted this era of flexible work. And it really gripped me. I'm very interested in the dynamics of work and how people work and how people live and work and how they do so in a sort of tech age. And I felt that the moment was changing. I've always thought that America has dominated a century of the way the world works. I mean, everything we live and work on, from, the computer or the credit card or the communications industry, the car, it's all been American. So I, like you, am obsessed with America and America's influence, and in particular on the world of work. And actually, I mean, do you know, have you heard of Elton Mayo? Have you heard of the Hawthorne studies, which form a very nice little collection in the Harvard Library? Because the American history of work stretches right across things you might not realize, like the whole history of HR is America. It originated in studies conducted in America.
And this, Julia, to historicize it, I know this will probably annoy you, but everybody often, when they talk about you, also talks about your father, the great 20th century historian, probably the greatest of all Anglo-American historians of the 20th century, Eric Hobsbawn, who was a scholar of labor and work from a Marxist position. This was the kind of stuff your father studied: work, labor, capital, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a rather sort of entrepreneurial take. I mean, first of all, of course, I'm not at all upset to be referred to as his daughter. It would be silly to be. I am very interested in the story of work and the culture of work and the politics of work. I'm interested. One of my favorite books at the moment, if you haven't read it, Andrew, I urge you to, is called The Concept of Work, Ancient, Medieval and Modern, by a brilliant sociologist called Herb Applebaum.
No, I haven't done that. Maybe we get Applebaum on the show. I had Douglas. Let me ask you this question on this history of work. I mentioned this to you before we went live. I had Doug Rushkoff on the show a few days ago, and he said to me that there weren't jobs in the Middle Ages. Is that true? Has work changed that dramatically that even the idea of a job didn't exist before maybe the 20th century?
Well, I think there are a bunch of romantics. You can see how Americanized I've become, Andrew, by saying bunch, because nobody in England actually says bunch. But I mean, I think there are people who really romanticize labor or work as somehow being either a gorgeous community operation. And some people do romanticize the Middle Ages and think that the Middle Ages, and in fact, Applebaum does a little bit, that these were a time when people just made community, and therefore, by that analysis, maybe Douglas Rushkoff is saying that work wasn't work. And Hannah Arendt, of course, chewed the fat a lot about what she called vita activa and the distinction between work and labor. I mean, what I'm interested in is the fact that, you know, more people on the planet work than do anything else on a daily basis, with the possible exception of Google search. I mean, it unites the world. Everybody works.
And people don't even do Google search anymore now because they've got AI. We'll come to AI, of course.
Well, we'll come to AI, but actually...
Let me ask you on this idea of work. Everybody works. Julia, do we work? And this is the kind of question that I would love to have asked your dad as well. Do we work because we want to? Do we work because we have to?
Well, I'm in the we want to camp. I'm very, very worried about the narrative that says, especially the Silicon Valley narrative, that says, oh, you know, none of us really want to work. It'll all be lovely when we're on universal basic income because work is a terrible chore. I think that's actually, I really think that's bullshit. I think human beings need purpose and community, and the things they get from work and workplace, which is one of the reasons why the workplace crisis post-COVID is so live and interesting. I do think that people need the politics of work to be fair. They need to be well paid, they need to be well managed, and so on. But I do think the notion that we're moving into a future that tries to minimize or eliminate human labor and badge that as emancipation, I'm not in that camp.
Yeah, however, and that's, as you say, that's you might write a book called The American Way of Work. That's the Silicon Valley way of maybe not working. That's the Silicon Valley vision of liberating us. It's again, referring to your father, it's the German ideology of the young Marx, who believed that technology would free us from labor and allow us to, what did Marx say, be poets in the afternoon, or I think farmers in the afternoon and poets in the evening. So you don't buy that idea, Julia?
No, I don't. And actually, I'm not really a fan of the 4-day week, although that's gained a lot of traction. And of course, next year in the big year for America, as your show is dedicated to, it will also be the 100th anniversary of Henry Ford introducing the 5-day week.
Interesting. That is a very, you need to write, if not a book, certainly an article or a post about that, because
we're actually, Workathon is doing some programs about that because it's hugely interesting. And one of the reasons why it's hugely interesting is that many of the factors that knit together the story of work is to do with workplace, is to do with immigration, is to do with industry, and is to do with sensibility and culture and rights, human rights and unions. So no, I'm not an evangelist for the 4-day week. I think people like Juliet Shaw, who write about it, are rather brilliant. I've had her on my show. You should have her on to talk about her new book. But I'm not convinced. I think that what matters is reflecting the social economics and culture of how people really live and work.
Would it be fair to say that Julia Hobsbawn invented the concept of the 8-day week in terms of work?
I think it would be very unfair, and I very much hope you don't do that. What I think is that,
I mean, but you're a diligent worker, to put it politely, Julia. I don't know anyone more dedicated to their calling intellectually, professionally, perhaps even financially. I mean, and I mean that in a complimentary way. Why should we be ashamed of working hard?
Well, we shouldn't be ashamed of working hard, but nor should we be ashamed of wanting leisure, and nor should we be ashamed of wanting work to be flexible around our lives. So one of the reasons why the corporate American retrenchment on flexible work is concerning internally, if nothing else, is that at the end of the pandemic, American labor force participation by women and people with disabilities was at an all-time high.
So let's get to the American way of work, the opposite of the American way of death. How did the pandemic affect it? My wife, as you know, works for Google, and it's supposed to be a forward-looking company, a company that's reinventing everything. And yet even they insist that senior people like my wife have to go into the office 3 days a week, and they check on it. It's bizarre.
Well, I mean, look, I'm not anti-office, and in fact, one of the reasons, why I carried on writing books like Working Assumptions after
the Nowhere Office, of course, your book from what you said, was that from 2022, The Nowhere Office: Reinventing Work and the Workplace of the Future.
Yes, and it really argued that what we needed to do, and this is apropos the flexibility point, is keep it real and reflect how people do live and work, which is people have caring responsibilities or childcare responsibilities or affordability issues on transport, or dare I say it, the technology allows them to do certain things very well. I mean, you talk to people like Owl Laboratories, Frank Weishaupt of Owl Laboratories based in Boston, the little cute devices on the table that a lot of kind of tech barons have. And their data shows, for example, something extraordinary like 97% of meetings are never fully quorate in the room. And of course, in a global marketplace and in large geographies, of course that's the case. So I'm fascinated. It's made me a living. I mean, Workathon came out of my book, The Nowhere Office, but I'm fascinated by the mindset that continues to deny the realities that, of course, technology has changed the way we work, the culture.
Yeah, but no one's arguing with that. You said you're American because you use the word bunch, but I would suggest, Julia, you're American. You use the phrase "keep it real." I mean, what does that mean?
What I mean is that it's very, very clear to me that, well, it might not be the case, but it is clear to me and my senses that there is a desire on behalf of boards, corporate leaders, large corporates to quote unquote go back, to be quite rosy tinted in their spectacle view of what the past of work looked like. And that's why I'm interested, as the daughter of a historian, in certainly locating the past story of work in the way we look at the present. Although, I'm a red in tooth and claw capitalist, Andrew, and my father was not. He found it very amusing. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur. I believe in business, and I think that's why I believe in America and the American way of work, the extraordinary levels of innovation, the extraordinary
Right. So
drive.
the title of the new book we've agreed is The Death of the American Way of Work. Is that fair?
Well, maybe. I mean, actually, my next book is
I
called
like that, though, because
Yeah.
that plays on the Mitford book about the American way of death, and you add death, and you still got the American way of work.
Ah, well, maybe that will be our joint book. I mean, what I would say of the American way of work is that rumors of its demise are exaggerated,
Mark Twain.
And yet there are troubling signs. Now, one of those troubling signs is that corporate boards are not getting real. So, for instance, we published at Workathon, which looks at the trends of work, which is a network for senior executives interested in these trends. We published a paper called The United State of Work on the 5th anniversary of the pandemic. And we had some essays in it and some look backs at what had shifted, but we also did some research. And we researched what issues like flexibility and AI adoption and talent mobility, three big themes we have highlighted for the world of work. And we looked at how they played out across 12 countries that spanned at least the main continents of the world. And what we found was that progress is being made not only in America. And what I mean by that, and interestingly, we published this pretty much a week before the tariff stuff started to really happen. And we said in our report, everything is, of course, completely connected. And I think America is behaving like it's spooked by the rest of the world because it is sensing that innovation and attitudes to work and policies around work are now beginning to be made elsewhere.
So let me ask you this question on this future of work and labor and all the rest of it. Has somebody else, maybe the Chinese, they always seem to be the most innovative on most fronts, are they inventing a new way of work, or are people taking the American way of work and refining it, modernizing it, updating it, innovating on it for the networked AI 21st century? Is there a new way of work, or is it just the American way 2.0, which has left the shores of this great continent?
I think it is the question. It's a great question. And there are two answers. One is the physicality and the products and services of work, what makes work and what makes jobs. So, Thomas Edison, great American, at his height, Edison was presiding over 40 different innovations at any given time. And
he was the Elon Musk of his age, really. And
right. And a quarter of anything the world used to work at one point was essentially invented by Thomas Edison, an American.
That's remarkable.
Yeah. And ditto Ford, Henry Ford. I mean, let's not overlook the blot on the landscape of Henry Ford and the anti-Semitism and the nuttiness. But I actually think that the Ford Motor Company is a landmark company. I don't think any company is a better example of the transitions that need to be made.
Yeah, it's no surprising that, of course, Aldous Huxley in his Brave New World introduced the concept of Ford as not just the ruler, but the god of this new place.
Well, because let's not forget that what Henry Ford did is he came directly into contact with the early trade unions and the kind of Knights of Labor movement. He tried to smash the unions and failed, but people like Elton Mayo and the Hawthorne studies, Ford responded to those. He ditched scientific principles of management and introduced, albeit zealously, rather worker-centric policies. So I think that the products and services that America has led with are still there. Silicon Valley's riding high, the American stock market is riding high, but to your point, I mean, you look at NVIDIA and DeepSeek.
NVIDIA is an American company, and we did a show on that, although it's run by a Taiwanese immigrant.
Yeah, but when you look at, say, DeepSeek, and when you look at the reliance which Donald Trump was very spooked by for the chips for NVIDIA. So the supply chain, that's, I think, one of the hidden stories about the tariffs, is it is very much that he does want all sources of production of work in America to be American. And I think that horse has bolted. So one issue, to answer your question, is that different products and services are being innovated and pioneered outside of America, but America remains the dominant engine of global innovation at the moment, I would say.
Let me ask you one question on the history.
But hang on. The other point I'd make, though, is where I do believe, and our research has showed, is that America is weaker, is in the culture of work and the workplace policies around flexibility and DEI. Because when you look, as we did, at Saudi Arabia and UAE, right? Not equality-based nations, you would think on the surface of it. On the 1st of April this year, the UAE introduced pretty much the most flexible working policies anywhere in the world outside of the Nordics and the UK. And
interesting. Yeah, we've got Karen House on the show talking about MBS, so I'll have to ask her about innovation in the workplace, in the office in Saudi.
So my contention is that the American way of work has set the tone for a century, is literally the benchmark, but that when you look at what the other countries are actually doing, whether they are retaining their DEI policies, you look at a company like DHL, a German company, they are resolutely pro the inclusive policies that the American narrative is trying to minimize. And then you look at the generational shifts and the demographics, Andrew, and that's where it becomes interesting. And that's where I think America's got to have a good hard think. For instance, the average age in some African countries is 15.
Average age of what? Workers, you mean? Or average age of just people?
The largest cohort of people are very, very, very young. And so what you see in Africa and what you see in the Middle East are the beginnings of a very different strategy, which is to retain workers in the way that those generations want to work. And that is not 9 to 5. And it
I want to get to two questions here. Firstly, a quick historical footnote. You mentioned Ford and his influence.
Edison, I also said.
And Edison and Ford, obviously two major figures. What about the influence of Taylorism and the idea of being of this idea of quantifying work and being watched at work, right, which of course now is being re-pioneered, if that's the right word, by Amazon and Bezos.
Yeah, I think that's...
I mean, when Bezos was at Amazon, but now Amazon's leading the charge on an increasingly panopticon-like workplace where everything is quantified and everything is work, which is Taylorism 2.0, essentially, it seems to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting point, because what happened is that the corporate culture that made America great, to coin a phrase. And
I haven't heard that one, Julia. Where'd you find that?
Exactly. And I mean, let's not forget that next year, I think, is the 25th anniversary of Good to Great, the Jim Collins book, which is, of course, American. So, the concept of great, you had a guest on your show the other day that talked about, I think it was the guy from the cable network, and he talked about freedom, the American way of freedom.
Yes.
I believe that the American way of work has been defined by a boundless, limitless sense of optimism and promise that, of course, we know has not delivered to the workforce. And it's another reason why America is vulnerable. I still think America can kind of get its mojo back, but it is going to have to reframe and rethink what it does about work. And I do think it's interesting that Charter, the workplace business focusing on the AI of work and also on HR.
Yeah, this is Kevin Delaney's new thing.
Right. And I talk a lot with Kevin, and I'm actually going to see him for a drink in New York shortly. But he's just
send him my best.
He's gonna be the editor-in-chief of the San Francisco Standard, and the San Francisco Standard,
and which is of course acquired through Mike Moritz, who always understands the future and has profited from the future and his understanding better than anyone. Ex-English journalist, Moritz has invested in Delaney and the Charter.
That's right, but here's a fascinating thing: is that in that editorial you just put up, Mike Moritz said something I thought was pretty extraordinary, and that was that Silicon Valley is the center of the universe of the future of work. And I thought, you can't mean that. I mean, it's the center of the universe of a lot of tech and innovation. But for my money, if the American work ethic isn't looked at in the context of really changing generations. I mean, let me put it another way, Andrew. You don't want progressives who want to build great big American companies. And by the way, statistically, the medium to big companies are much more the story than the small mom and pop businesses, despite the the popular narrative. If you want more of the big, iconic legacy American businesses, then they have to understand the way the world of work is changing, and AI is not the answer to everything.
Right. So maybe we can do another show on AI, Julia, because it's such a huge subject. And you and I have been talking about even doing combining my show with your World Work Organization, maybe doing a weekly show. You mentioned earlier that the average age of people in Africa is 15, and that the Saudis are innovating too, and that the Americans will have to shift towards what people want when it comes to work. So I have a simple question for you, and this is something I know you've been given a lot of thought to. What exactly do people want when it comes to work? I mean, obviously they need to earn a living, that goes without saying. But what is it people want, or what is it that people want in the 2020s that they haven't wanted before? Is it sitting at home or in a cafe with a MacBook Pro and or a MacBook Air and just having their own office anywhere it is, the nowhere office? Or is it the experience? Is it community? What is it that people want?
It really depends on who you talk to. There is no one size fits all anymore. And this, to my mind, is the Achilles heel of the American way of work, which is it was built on the repeatability and the scale that's been the mantra of VCs and corporate boards forever. And the reality is that it'd be great to talk about this with you and Keith. But the reality, Keith Tier,
of course.
But the reality is that there is now a complete disaggregation of what norm is, and that is what is so difficult for businesses and corporations. Which is, for example, Walmart has got a very different level of operation. It's got a heavy presence in Africa. Walmart was, at least until recently, possibly again, the biggest private employer in the world. I think Amazon now is. But, Walmart is still a pretty good benchmark, and it's American. And of course, the think global, act local applies. So, this is really a problem because you cannot impose a one size fits all. And
I take your point, and we've done lots of shows on Walmart, historians of Walmart who have made some of their employees happy, in some ways given them some security, although they don't pay them very much. But are you suggesting that, I take your point, maybe a one size fit all doesn't work, but is your alternative this just sort of infinitely bespoke work experience where everything's different? It doesn't scale at all. You don't make any generalization.
What I believe, this is why we probably need to talk about it every week, Andrew, because I think this is the most interesting subject, certainly of my career.
I agree. You and I share that, although we're coming at it slightly differently, but I think we both agree on it.
Oh, I think this is the most important story outside of geopolitics. And I think that actually, it might sound a bit trite, but, I do think that work change is the new climate change. Every single workplace, every single worker, every single workforce, every single city, product is going to be changed continuously. And if that is not a challenge, I don't know what is. But just to track back briefly what I said before, which is, if you take it in a political context, we know, don't we, that the Democrats just sleepwalked into disaster again and again and again with a narrative that the voters didn't buy and didn't believe and didn't vote for. My concern about a lot of the way that work is being looked at and addressed, whether it's by investors or whether it's by boards, is a similar kind of denial. It's why I've created Workathon. It's why we're actually, I'm in America a lot with it, because the progressive organizations, they know they've got to get a handle on it, because it is the big story, it's the big opportunity, and it's the big risk. And just so we have a little sense of the demographics for America, the Flex Index that Brian Elliott, one of the great gurus of the future of work, he's just become chair of the Flex Index, has great data. We should talk to Brian. Is that the Flex Index has shown that attitudes to flexibility are completely different amongst companies that started after the year 2000, for example. So my belief is that we are witnessing a generational transition as important as generative AI, basically. That we are not focusing disproportionately on AI and its influence on work, but it's not the whole story. That we need to look at much, much bigger patterns that are going on, and we need to look around the world in what I call the United State of work. And I really believe that.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Your Workathon organization, you're the founder, the CEO. It's an important subject. As I half jokingly suggested, you need to write a book called The Death of the American Way of Work. That's what you've been talking about. Julia, we'll do some more shows on this. Maybe we'll combine in some way. I only have one final remark to you in London. Keep it real, Julia.
Always, Andrew.